So at this point, once I've tried to maximize signal, I'm going to go to quads. Now, quads are something that really affect peak shape, and they're something that you may need to adjust first rather than last, depending on how new and how new your settings are and how much you've changed in the instrument once you started tuning. So after big changes like tube changes, cone changes, glassware changes, that quad is going to be the first thing you're going to touch rather than the last. But when we're pretty close to a good tune, we don't need to adjust that just yet, because what usually happens is you bring your quads up, and we don't want to bring them up unless we really need to. So I always go for signal intensity first. If my peak's pretty close, then I'll go to kind of change the peak shape a little bit. And everybody does it different. As long as you have a beautiful tune setting at the end of the day, that's what counts. But we'll just start with our quads now for our peak shape changes. What you'll see is quad 1 is sitting at 48.8, which is pretty high already. I don't want to change that very much, so I may bring it up just 1. And I'll see how that'll change my peak shape. We've lost some of this angle here on the shoulder, but we've kind of added a curve here. So let's watch it one more time. It's always good to see 2 passes when you make those initial changes. Good. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my linked quads, these lower masses, underneath my high masses, and I do that using linked quads. It's right up top of quad 1. And what you're doing with linked quads to figure out what direction is you're going to move them whatever direction your low masses need to go. So my low masses, these guys, need to move left, so I'm going to click link quads left. It usually takes a couple to 3 to get those guys to line up. I always start with 2, and then I'll go 2 or 1 more and do it very gradually. You can always go back. Let's move them over a couple more. And what you'll notice is that we kind of lost whatever we gained with moving our quad in the first place once we kind of stack everything up. So maybe quad 1 isn't the one that's going to be the game changer today. And every day is a new day with this stuff, but quad 1 and HV5, you're kind of just pick your one to modify first and then see which one does a better job. So we'll leave quad 1 there. Most of our masses are lined up. Now what I'm going to do is switch to high voltage, and I'm going to go to HV5. I'm going to click HV5 up 1, because remember, when you move up, you usually improve peak shape. And we're just going to watch how it changes. So we've lost a little bit of that shoulder, so I'm going to move HV5 up 1 more. We're getting a little bit less shoulder again, so maybe 1 more. But what I am noticing happening is we're kind of losing our flatness here, so I might back off on HV5 just 1 or 2. And like I said, you can always go back to original settings to see if you actually have changed something you want to change. And if I'm not really sure that HV5 is moving in the right direction, I'll move it a lot. I'll click it up 4 and see how that changes my peak. So I've moved HV5 up quite a bit, but you'll see that our peak shape is so much more improved than before when we just moved our quads. And I could have moved quads way up. I could have fixed this peak shape by moving quads very high. But I want you to know you don't have to do that, and it's not the right answer when you're trying to fix a peak shape when your quads are already quite high. So if you can help it, move HV5 before you move quads way up there. So I'm actually going to try HV5 1 more time to really optimize that shape, see if we can get it any better. It's already looking pretty good, but it looks like we still have a baby bald top here, kind of rounding a little bit. So that might look a little bit better. If you're getting a little noise in your signal, sometimes you can switch over to this integrate rather than single. And what that does is it'll integrate your signal for as long as you run on the passes. So if I switch to integrate, you would see your first one, which would be the only single scan. And then as it came around and passed over it again, you'll see the cycle number 2. So it's going to be the average of these 2 passes. And you could keep going to, 100 passes. But we usually stop at about 4 to see general peak shape without noise. So we'll give it a couple more passes to see how it actually looks. But to me, there's still a little bit of rounding, which I'm not super into. So we're going to try to take care of that a little bit more. We're getting very close, though. All right, so let's go back to single. And let's look at that peak. And then we're going to peak center, and we're going to go through all of our tune settings one other time. We always tune twice at minimum. So we'll go ahead and peak center. I'm just going to do all of the same steps we talked with you before about. So I'm going to find the midpoint of HV1, make sure it's still 6018. And it looks like that may not be true anymore. Got quite a big jump there, so let's change that. Let's try 19. So it looked like 6019 was a pretty good midpoint, but let's confirm that. 6049. And then 5989. And that's a pretty small dip. So let's go with that. Generally, HV1 on your first pass always changes by the second. That's pretty normal. All right, let's move to HV2. It's already pretty high, but we can go a little bit higher if we're brave. But it doesn't really seem to be changing much, so let's bring that back down, and let's bring it down even more. No. So that's sitting fine. Let's go to HV3. And you can move a lot faster on your second pass because you already kind of know where the sweet spot is. Now you're just making really small changes. So sometimes that can be more difficult to see, and if that's the case, if you're having a really hard time discerning change, what you can do is go to your scale for 238 and get that 238 line much closer to the top, so you can really see when you're kind of hitting that max out line. So we could go 1.9 instead, and I'd get it much closer here so I could see when I'm actually improving. And that's always an option if you can't see if you're making enough changes. These spikes happen again along the crystal. Since it's a heterogeneous crystal, there's different sections of the grain with different chemistry. You'll see some spikes for certain elements. So I see 2 spikes, so that's a 204 spike. And in general, our ion counter peaks for Faraday routines are very noisy anyway. So I just make sure they're underneath our major masses and that they're fairly flat, even though there are going to be a lot of noise in there. Let's just finish up HV3, make sure we're on the right track. That looks pretty good. Now again, I'm moving to HV5. Now I feel like I'm in the right place. I may gain intensity by changing that, but I may not gain peak shape. So I'm going to move it around, but I'm going to make note of this value if I need to go back to it to get my peak shape looking much better. And like I said, every time you bring HV5 down, you're going to increase your signal intensity. That just may not be the right choice. Just depends on what's going on that day. All right, let's move to source. Just go through our tune one last time. While I'm doing this, I'll just tell you another great strategy is to actually look at your peak after you change each one if you want to see what they're doing, and you're not confident that you're doing anything, which it feels like that some days, don't worry. So if I were to go through all of my high voltage units, maybe I'd go check out my peak shape right after that, so I can see how those changes had affected my peak shape. Or as I go through each one, I can go check my peak shape and see how it's changed. And that's a really great learning technique that you could try as you're kind of learning how to tune and getting a feel for the new. It's something I had to do just to get things locked in. So don't feel like it's redundant. It's not. It's always good to see how changes you're making are affecting the instrument. All right. So let's check out that peak shape. I've gone through everything. We haven't gone through torch position. We only go through torch position once. Once your torch is set, it doesn't really change. And in fact, anytime you make a torch position change, you need to go through all of your tune settings again. It's a big factor in peak shape. So if you decide later on that maybe you didn't do a great torch job, don't do that at the end. Do it at the beginning, and then you'll have to go through all the other stuff anyway. So kind of leave that for the beginning of your tune session, not the end of it. But we're looking pretty good. We have the tiniest rounding happening at the top, but we have some nice, pretty approaching vertical sides. I wouldn't say they're vertical. I'm not delusional. But we still just have some rounding here. And I'm going to adjust HV5 to see if I can take care of it. And if I still can't take care of it with HV5, I'm going to go back to our quads. Looks like we clipped some of it down, but I always like 2 passes. And maybe let's do 2 more jumps up just to see if we can really get it better. I feel like we're losing this edge, but let's make sure. Let's watch it one more time. Yeah, let's bring that back a couple. Just a little note, there's this dip happening in thorium, and you may start to see it in the 238. And what's happening is you're moving a little bit out, too far out on your slits at that point. So you're not really centering on them anymore. You're outside the range and it's clipping the signal. And that's how you know you're pushing it too far with your quads. You're pushing it too far one direction. As you'll see this little clipping motion. Those are good indications you've pushed things too far. Other indications is you've changed a lot of settings and you didn't change anything in the instrument. That usually never happens. Usually big changes in the instrument have big changes on the tune. If no big changes have been made, and if none have been made, and it's not an old tune file, you shouldn't be changing quite that much. So, always go back to your original and make sure that you're not, not getting too overzealous. So this beat is close to perfect, but it's not perfect. So what you'll do basically when you're pretty close, but not close yet, is just continue to go through those tune settings. And at that point, you may want to do what I'm saying, where you're changing a couple settings, looking at your peak. Changing a couple settings, looking at your peak. And I've already told you the big ones, quads 1, HV5. Another one that will shift your peak left and right is sorts H1. You can see how that affects your peak. But really, iteration is what counts with tuning in the new lab. So if it doesn't look good the first time, just try it again. And the very last thing what we'll do once we have our tune as close or as good as we'd like is to then adjust any gas settings that we feel might need to be changed.